grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worry on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear a pitter-pat? And that happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet.
Hi, welcome to another On the Sunny Side of the Street. I'm your host, Todd Gross, a clinical psychologist and director of Adams Street Associates, a group practice in Newton. And our show really likes to highlight the positive stories in the news that you don't usually get to hear. And so we interview people who are doing things that help other people and make a difference in a positive way. Sometimes when we do interviews, we talk to people who are in the practice of really helping other people in professions like my own in clinical psychology. And occasionally we have somebody who not only does amazing work with children and families, but we also have someone who has some real talent in translating scientific knowledge into practical skills in books that have been written. And so we're lucky enough to have with us today as a guest Dr. Adam Cox. Hi, Dr. Cox, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Dr. Cox is a licensed and board-certified clinical psychologist, and he's devoted his career to the study of executive control skills and the connections between language and learning problems and social and emotional development. He's an international speaker and national, has been at conferences, has appeared on radio, TV, and in the media. Very nice to have you with us. And I thought maybe as a way of starting for our audience, we're both clinical psychologists. The route that you took to become one is very interesting itself. I wonder if you could start by just telling people how you became a clinical psychologist.
Well, sure. And first, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I
Thank you.
Certainly appreciate the opportunity to be on the show and provide some useful strategies for parents. And in fact, I did become a psychologist quite by accident because my parents raised me to be an artist, and in fact, that's what I set off to do, going to art school and then later on moving to the New York City area, and got busy making fine art as a painter and showing my work in galleries. And it was about this time that the street that I opened my studio on had many kids who were looking for some positive mentoring and an adult influence in their lives, and I saw them peering in at me outside the plate glass windows of my studio. And I got to be honest with you, Todd, is that I invited these kids in because I thought if I made friends with them, there was less of a chance that I'd have a problem with them on the street. So I invited them in and
security reasons, right?
taught them how to paint and draw.
Yeah.
And it was just a short number of weeks after that I can remember sitting in my apartment and thinking, my gosh, I can't believe it, but I missed my calling, because as much as I enjoyed making art, working with these kids was powerful and transformational. Exciting. And I haven't looked back since then, and I've just thoroughly enjoyed my work as a psychologist.
Well, that's wonderful. And for our viewing audience, I want to say that the path that you then followed has been helpful to many, many people. I'm going to concentrate a little bit for our audience today on two books that you wrote that I think are incredibly practical and helpful for parents and for people who are dealing with learning issues and emotional communication kinds of issues. You wrote two books. I would just let people see them. One is called Boys of Few Words. A very helpful book, and we'll be talking about that one. And the second book that we'll be talking about is No Mind Left Behind. And I wonder if you could give us just a little background of how the information, which I find very valuable in these books, how this all evolved in your career, how you got interested in these topics of boys and their communication skills and problems in that, and also in what we will talk about as some of the major skills that kids need to have executive control.
Well, early in my career, when I was still a graduate student and I desperately needed a job to help support my family, I took the only job that I could find in eastern Pennsylvania, which was working with some very tough boys in the hill towns of eastern Pennsylvania. And in I would go to the schools, sitting in the guidance office that was painted all these pretty pastel colors, and looking across at me were these kind of tough-minded kids who had no interest in connecting, very poor communication skills, and it was an exercise in frustration for someone who had been trained in traditional counseling approaches and strategies. And I would drive home at the end of the day with two big thoughts in my mind, and the first was, if someone, anyone, could develop a language and a method for connecting with these boys. They
Yes.
could build an entire career around that work.
Right.
And the second thought I had was, please, God, don't let it be me, because it was too hard. It was just an outrageously difficult type of work.
What a challenge.
I thought I would be working in a more cosmopolitan area with people that were great communicators.
But no.
It seemed to be the calling. And so when I opened a private practice years later, I discovered that in my community, these were the kids that really needed someone to connect with them and that needed some help. And so at first, I found it to be quite a challenge, but over the years, scaffolding one new idea after another, I've developed a whole language and set of strategies for relating to these kids.
Well, that's really interesting how it evolved for you. And I think what I want to do for our audience is look at each of the two books a little bit and some of the wonderful ideas that came out of this experience for you. The first book, The Boy's a Few Words, to start talking about that a little bit, one of the things that struck me in reading it is how the case you make about why boys start out at a disadvantage most often in communication, expressive language skills compared to girls. And I wonder if you could say a little bit, and this will get into the science of it a little bit too, but for the audience and for parents watching, what kinds of differences that start out right from the beginning with boys and girls around this that you noticed?
The most important difference is that girls hear so much better than do boys. That's one of the things that we have to recognize. Most parents who have had young children in school recognize that most girls develop reading skills 12 to 18 months ahead of boys.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that girls hear the building blocks of words, what we call phonemes, so much earlier and more efficiently in life than do boys. And what we've learned from research around the world is that kids who learn to read earlier also develop social skills a little bit earlier. It turns out that the same parts of the brain involved in encoding these phonemes and contributing to language and reading development have a lot to do with our ability to understand how to respond to others in various types of social situations. So the auditory processing difference of boys and girls is very different and accounts for much of the delay that we see in the social communication skills of boys. The other important difference is that when we look at how language is being processed by boys, we see that it's happening over there on the left hemisphere of the brain, whereas with girls it's happening left
Both.
and right hemisphere.
Yes.
So all of this important socio-perceptual material that is processed by the right hemisphere of the brain is being shared with the left hemisphere, giving girls sometimes a more comprehensive understanding of what's being said to them, and then also pointing them toward a really great response in different situations.
Right.
So
There's
with-
even a difference you mentioned in the corpus callosum.
we think that there's a difference in the corpus callosum. The research kind of, volleys back and forth on that. But for a number of years, what has been found is that the corpus callosum, which joins the two hemispheres of the brain, it's a tract of white matter that is like the superhighway that joins the left and right hemisphere, tends to be larger, more bulbous in girls than it is in boys, allowing for a more kind of free flow of information or sharing of information between those right and left hemispheres.
So that definitely gives girls an advantage for the most part. You started to say things that pertain to this, but can you help also for the listeners draw a connection between this kind of disadvantage and what the implications are for social development? A lot of people think about learning problems and they look at them in isolation to the social emotional issues that it then causes for people who have these learning issues. Can you make a little bit of, which you do in the book, a little of the point about the connection between the two?
Well, the important connection is that it's our ability to perceive certain kinds of social cues, that our brain is awake and receptive to those cues, that gives us the courage to experiment with social expression. So, those kids who at an early age do better with the neurological processing dimension of this tend to develop a little bit more social courage, so they have more practice. During that critical period of childhood, of neurodevelopment, when your brain can really encode these new ideas and learnings, build neural networks for retaining these new ideas and strategies, and so you tend to become skilled more efficiently or with with greater ease than somebody who's not picking up those kinds of cues in various types of social interaction, or somebody who doesn't hear the building blocks of language as clearly.
Okay, and to build on that, in your book, there are chapters devoted to 3 different kinds of boys that you see develop: the shy, kind of withdrawn boy, the aggressive boy, and the child who has just, the all kinds of attention, learning kind of issues.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the challenges of each of those 3.
Those are 3 particularly challenging types of boys. And, one thing I should mention is that sometimes, when people see the title of my book, Boys, A Few Words, they take it literally. And I would encourage people not to, because in my practice, I work with many boys who are hyperlexic. They are excellent readers. They know a lot of words, but they still might have some social difficulties.
Sure.
They might be strong intellectualizers, or they might be kids who, as smart as they are, still don't pick up certain kinds of interpersonal cues. So it's affecting a whole spectrum of boys, but these 3 categories of boys are especially important, because the shy and withdrawn boys, they are really hesitant to experiment with social risk-taking. And often they've had an experience of being incorrect in reading the cues and of other people. And so if they've made a mistake, they feel very self-conscious.
Yeah.
And so they adopt a low-risk strategy, which of course stunts their social development.
And probably hurts their self-esteem a lot,
and hurts their self-esteem, because, how important is it to have friends when you are an elementary school age student, middle or high school student? Your success in drawing other kids to you becomes so important. And along those lines, one of the most important things kids should learn is that they don't need to use just verbal communication, but nonverbal communication. The power of a smile is so important in helping boys develop these kinds of friendships. So angry boys are ones who are often have a kind of skewed way of understanding relationships, where they might perceive that every interaction is a kind of thing where I'm either the winner or the loser.
Yes.
And so they tend to kind of separate the world into 2 groups. And so it's a question of, am I the victor or the vanquished? And so they tend to avoid the more kind of subtle communication patterns that really facilitate great relationships, and often tend to try to conquer other people in the midst of conversation, or simply opt out of conversation and use their resistance as a form of leverage or assertion, or as a manifestation of how they express their anger.
Right.
And then the last group, the kids who are learning disabled, these are the kids who have some complex interactions at a neurological level between that right hemisphere, which does all the kind of social perception, and the prefrontal cortex, which does a lot of important decision-making, exercising of judgment, and things like that. So there's often, these kids might often be diagnosed with nonverbal learning disabilities.
Right.
Many kids with language-based learning disabilities have difficulty with social expression and have suffered from a lack of practice and opportunity to build those skills.
Okay, so that's very helpful in kind of outlining some of the kinds of problems that can be encountered with this. What is so valuable about this book, in my opinion, from reading it, is your ability to translate these issues and what we know in science to practical strategies for parents. And I just want to mention a few of the things. You talk about 10 commitments that parents can make. This might be helpful for the parents watching. I'll mention each one, and maybe if you could comment briefly. One of the commitments you talk about is just making time for your child. And
Time is essential. In my practice, I have a big sign. Sometimes my staff kids me that it's a billboard sign. It says, "Time and attention are the most valuable gifts that we give children. Please be generous." And so
I like that.
Time is where it all happens, because sometimes as parents, we think we have to be clever or smart or more strategic, when really what it comes down to is dedicating the time to building a relationship. That's the sense of safety and rapport where kids get comfortable, because the big challenge with boys in improving their communication is helping them get beyond their fear of vulnerability. That's the most important thing that parents can do, is to minimize a boy's sense of vulnerability, and spending time together, particularly engaged in an activity that doesn't involve eye-to-eye contact.
Driving in the car talking.
Driving in the car
working
talking.
on a project side by side.
You got it. That's it.
Yeah.
I often say to families, throw out your kitchen table tonight because it's the site of all the trauma. We sit down and want to have this heart-to-heart talk, looking deep into our son's eyes, and that's exactly the wrong approach when we want to make boys feel comfortable.
You're going to get, I don't know, or whatever.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
How about empathy? You talk about that. I find that as a critical concept in work, teaching these boys how to read other people's reactions and try to understand how other people feel.
Empathy is absolutely the cornerstone of my work with boys. All of these things. The importance of great social communication is really in the interest of building boys' empathy. Empathy is the tenuous string that joins boys to a life of conscience, leadership, and community. Empathy is everything.
Well said.
Boys have all the skill they need for what we call instrumental communication. Can I borrow $20? Can I have the keys to the car?
They know how to do that.
You're going to eat all them fries. They know how to do that perfectly well. It's the kind of social communication that involves empathy and concern for others that is more difficult, and they really need some valuable models, and the family is the best place to start modeling that with dinner time conversation. The relationship with one's father becomes crucially important,
yes.
Extended family, etc.
What do you think that other person felt when this was said? Kind of questions and drawing them out to actually even begin to think about it from the other person's point of view.
Of course, and we would never even, in my work with boys, I never even bring up the word empathy because I think it's too abstract and boys don't get it.
It has to be concrete.
So I sometimes say it's an active consideration, or how are we being considerate of others? That they can get.
Yes.
We can boil that down to specific actions that express empathy for other people, and then as they get older, we help them kind of connect the dots and understand why these things are important to do. But early in boys' lives, as young as 3 or 4 years of age, is the time to begin creating opportunities for them to express that consideration of other people.
I know we won't have time to do justice to all this, but this book, I want people to know, is jammed with helpful ideas like what you just said. Just a couple of the others: willingness to take action, staying positive, being informed, teaching, setting an example, collaborating, being persevering in your work with your child, and knowing your family's values. Every one of those probably could be a lecture itself.
Absolutely.
But those are all things parents do. And just maybe to give you a chance to comment a little more, you have things about highlighting your son's likes and dislikes, helping your son understand his uniqueness within the context of the family, asking questions and encouraging activities that allow a child self-expression. Any just reactions to some of that? I wanted people to get a flavor that you have really specific strategies for parents.
Well, the important thing there is that we can't help boys to become empathic until they first have some basic self-awareness. You can't be aware of other people until you've learned how to be aware of yourself. So early on in boys' lives, we help them to understand how they are alike and how they are different from their peers, how they are alike and different from family members. We do whatever we can to build a sense of identity and to build what psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to understand the intentions and the fact that other people have subjective differences in the way that they see the world. Young children think that what they believe and see is what everyone sees and believes.
Exactly, yes.
And so the earlier on in life that we create opportunities for kids to develop a sense of their own uniqueness and that others are different through great conversation, through really, wonderful family conversations in the car or around dinner. And the same thing happens in school. There are just miraculous teachers who are doing great work who understand this important developmental factor in boys' lives.
Well, all those are incredibly helpful. I want to move for a second to the second book, the No Mind Left Behind book. In that book, you have a way of doing something that I think is very important in our field, and that is you translate, again, a whole bunch of learning problems and a general label, which is called executive function disorder, into exactly these 8 pillars, each of them being a kind of skill that not only boys, that people need to have in terms of negotiating the world. And I wonder if we could spend a little time on each of those 8 pillars, maybe to say a little bit of how you develop them, and then secondly, to talk about each of the pillars and what suggestions, a few sample of suggestions about what you can do to help foster each of those pillars.
Well,
it's a big topic.
It is, and I should say that the genesis of this book is that for many years in my clinical practice, I saw all kinds of kids come in with a range of diagnoses, and I asked myself, what's the common denominator?
Okay.
What kind of connects all these kids, and what kinds of things could we target for intervention with virtually any of these kids that would help them, that would immediately result in some practical differences in how they did their schoolwork, how well they could regulate themselves, self-control, these important aspects of child
These
development.
are the very things that the parents watching the show today, I'm sure, really want some help with, too.
Absolutely. So, we have this term executive function, which honestly sounds a little clunky or almost like a business term.
Yeah, it does.
And, I regret that, but we inherit that term from neuroscience. It's been around for a good, 15 or 20 years, and it relates to these 8 executive thinking skills that originate in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the front part of the brain's frontal lobe. And these 8 critical areas of competence are, in my mind, the tipping point of 21st century capability when it comes to really great kids. And let's remember, we want kids that do exceptionally well in school. Everybody wants kids that work up to their potential. But we also want kids that function well in the community, in families, that can build great peer relationships, and the judgment, the decision-making, the self-control and self-awareness that are all part of great executive function are the way that kids make it to that level
Absolutely.
of capability. So the 8 pillars, the first one is initiation, and it's the
Okay.
ability to get started on something. If you have problems with initiation, it's not the same as being a procrastinator, because that's like an emotional problem. You have an aversion to doing
Yeah, you
something.
don't feel like doing it.
If you have an initiation problem, you don't know what the entry point is for a particular task, what those first 3 steps are to sequence to get started on something. So productivity and efficiency, for better or for worse, are huge values in our society as it now stands.
Yes.
And so helping kids become better initiators allows them to use their time more efficiently, to output at a level that keeps them, on pace with other people, that helps them to meet expectations. And so a lot of routine and structure is very helpful for kids with initiation problems. They need to start their homework at the same time every day.
Yes.
They need to have a ritual when they come home.
Repetitive pattern.
10 minutes for my snack, onto my homework, and it's done before we sit down for dinner, and I don't waste a lot of time by, tapping my pencil and sitting there at the kitchen table for 3 or 4 hours doing what should really be 40 minutes worth of work.
Just one comment on the initiation one. What I see is very oftentimes, you mentioned before the differentiation between that and procrastination. Parents who have a kid like this, and if they can't understand that this is really coming from a skill that is missing, it becomes seen as laziness, avoidance.
Thank you.
You know?
Absolutely. What an important point is that one of the primary motivating factors for me to write this book is that we moralize about problems that are
Yes.
processing problems. We say, he could do it if he tried harder.
Just
She
work
doesn't
harder.
really care. He's not that into it. All of these moralizing
Yes.
statements lead us in the wrong direction with respect to helping kids. We need more roll up your sleeves, practical hands-on strategies to get them moving
Thank you
forward.
for that. I'm so glad you get that. That's what the beauty of this book is. You get that out. Let's keep
Absolutely.
going with the pillars. It's fascinating.
The second pillar is attention, the marquee pillar that everybody knows about, because when we talk about executive dysfunction, we're really reframing this syndrome called ADHD and breaking it down into its component parts, I feel, in a far more meaningful way. To me, ADHD is a somewhat hollow term that doesn't lead us to the kinds of interventions and strategies that should be options of first resort. So that's what we're talking about
Right.
with the 8 pillars, options of first resort. So I'd suggest that there are hardly any inattentive kids in our society, but there are loads of over-attentive kids. And let me give you an example of what I mean. Hey, somebody just called my name. I think I'll have a snack. That kid's playing soccer. You've got a new DS game. There goes a little spider across the floor. They are paying attention to
Yes,
everything at
absolutely.
once and not discriminating what is the priority. What's the most important thing for me to be paying attention to? So they need help with this kind of architecture of attention, the architecture of priorities. They need a rubric for decision making, someone to coach them and to help them with respect to how do I decide where to allocate my time and what's
Right.
most important. And the other critical ingredient here, I can't overstate it, is tone and tempo. Because so often we get frustrated with kids because they don't respond to our efforts to reason with them about why they should pay more attention, and we haven't set the table with tone and tempo using our physical proximity,
Yes.
our vocal tone, our kinesthetic touch,
Yes.
making connection with
Yes.
kids. Those are the things that wake up their minds and bodies
Yes.
and set the table for us to actually
them.
have a more advanced kind of intervention.
In about a little less than 5 minutes. I'm going to ask you to see if we can go through the rest of them, just so people get a little flavor of them.
Yeah. Okay.
So we had 2 of them so far.
Okay, so the third one is flexibility. It has 2 dimensions, is that to be a good problem solver, you have to be able to move your mind around a problem. If you try to solve every problem in the same way, it brings to mind the great saying of Abraham Maslow, if you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Yes.
So we want kids that have a lot of different tools and can move their minds around problems, that can adjust tempo. They can go faster when it's required and slow down. The 4th pillar is the most important of all. It's called working memory, and it's the ability to hold a new concept, new learning in your short-term memory. It's the rocket fuel of the modern mind. It's what allows us to multitask, and it's the essence of being able to learn, Todd, because we have a lot of kids in our society who have all the IQ points they need to understand or comprehend something, but they don't transition that new information from working memory to long-term memory because their working memory doesn't hold on to the new learning fast enough or for long enough. The 5th pillar is organization. That's the management of personal space, which becomes absolutely enormous during middle school. The 6th pillar is planning, which is the management of time.
Right.
So that a good planner is someone who begins with the end in mind and can hold in mind simultaneously what they're doing at the moment and the consequence that's going to come from that 90 seconds from now, a day from now, a week from now. They have to be able to do that. So kids who have problems with planning often have great difficulty when they make the transition to, say, 4th or 5th grade, and they have to be more independent.
Yes.
Because they don't manage timelines and due dates very well.
Okay.
And so they need some coach and some coaching and some support with developing timelines and staying on track and working, with a kind of end point back to where they are now. The 7th pillar is self-monitoring, which is your ability to look at yourself with an objective third eye, so that in a social situation, you know that if I'm not eliciting the kind of response that I want from my friends at recess, that I should do something different. Maybe I'm not speaking loud enough, or maybe I'm not speaking at all, or maybe I'm not letting anybody else have a chance to talk. So a lot to do with social development. The 8th pillar is emotional control, which is all about expressing your emotions in proportion to what elicited those feelings. So that, for example, haven't all of us known some young kids who have a total meltdown over something like a rainy day when they were planning to go on a picnic that couldn't be avoided by anybody? So that's, and then the opposite side is that you're so stoic and unemotional that you fail to send the signals to other people that you care or that you're connected when they tell you something that's very important.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. I want to emphasize to the people watching that each of these pillars is really explained and specific concrete ideas come out to help parents. In the last minute or so, any comments you want to make for parents who are trying to negotiate this that might give them some hope that, even though we have all these difficult skills, things can be done?
100 years ago, we thought that a child's intelligence was a fixed quantity, and we spent the last 100 years categorizing kids according to IQs, and we have now, 100 years later, come back to the original ideas of IQ testing and understanding that intelligence is malleable, that we can improve kids' capability, we can improve all of these 8 pillars, and that they can do a phenomenal job with things that look like they're difficult when we put the right kinds of supports in place. The ecology, managing the ecology of attention, tone and tempo is where it begins.
Thank you. I want to thank you, and I know that you're going to be talking at the Fenn School in Concord. That is
on the evening of November 9th at 7 p.m. I will be at the Fenn School talking about boys' social and emotional development and communication, and I believe there's a number on the screen.
There's a phone number, for people to call.
Yes, if they want to. It's a free talk, but they have to kind of pre-register.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming. I enjoyed talking with you. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Please join us again soon on another On the Sunny Side of the Street. Take care, everybody.
Grab your coat and get your hat. Leave your worry on the doorstep. Just direct your feet to the sunny side of the street. Can't you hear a pitter-pat? And that happy tune is your step. Life can be so sweet on the sunny, sunny, sunny side of the street.